In this presentation, I will argue that Herman Kahn was a futurist of the 20th century and a forward thinker for his time based on the analysis of his written works as well as the interest in technology and systems. Herman Kahn lived from February 15, 1922 to 1983 and was most famous for his thoughts on nuclear deterrence. Herman Kahn has written 4 books in his lifetime titled On Thermonuclear War, Thinking About the Unthinkable, On Escalation, and the Year 2000. He was very interested in human systems earlier in his career with military systems, then later more focused on social systems. His career started at the RAND Corporation, which is the initial center of modern policy research. This was one of the first places where university-caliber minds were put to work to think of solutions to solve modern problems that the world was facing. This was research dominated by quantitative and abstract data collecting techniques such as game theory, linear programming, and logistical analysis. His main focus was on the necessity of arms control during the Cold War. The most famous work, titled On Thermonuclear War, in which the main theme discusses how likely it is that nuclear war will occur and not totally annihilate life on Earth. He states in his book that the less number of casualties allowed from a nuclear attack, the more likely a rehabilitation of the human population will be. In his book On Thermonuclear War, Kahn puts great emphasis on deterrence from a psychological standpoint between the Soviets and the United States. In his next major work, On Escalation, he looks at how important social aspects of negotiation is playing a huge role in the de-escalation of nuclear powers. Negotiations can be used as a type of weapon. In his first book, Kahn stated that the emphasis of technology and how it would shape the future of policymaking. In one part of the book titled World War I through World War VIII, Kahn discusses how technology would be at the front of creating military policy and strategy. After his establishment of critical thinking in his initial books, Kahn was able to change from a military strategist to a futurist thinker later in his career. This is where Kahn moves to his more common ideas of a future in his book titled The Year 2000, where he explores possibilities in future civilizations. A major feature that Kahn brought to the future theories from his military policy making is the use of scenarios. His idea of scenarios are as follows: hypothetical sequence of events constructed for a purpose of focusing attention on causal processes and decision points. This is where Kahn can see all the possible situations and outcomes to a particular actions from the perspectives of all actors who would be involved. This in turn would allow a person to have some sort of prediction about the future. In Kahn's need to find a solution of a nuclear war by focusing on deterrence and arms control, Kahn found where his idea of the future fits in the systems and structures that he created. Kahn's thinking moved into the area of human community instead of world security. To focus his effort, he sees 2 crucial problems policymakers face. 1. The need to have and operate with a broad, multifaceted vision of phenomena. And 2. The issue of coping imaginatively and realistically with future circumstances and conditions that can vaguely be distinguished in the present. In his book, The Year 2000, it is clear that Kahn has always been a future watcher in both his ideas of nuclear deterrence and community organization. He argues that the most difficult thing for future generations to decide is the difference between change and continuity. This means not to pick between the two, but rather the ideas or concepts that continue on within the things that change themselves, arguing that people create the illusion that to survive, society needs to keep things the same. However, in a world that is constantly developing, this is impossible, making this thinking then become our own undoing. In his book, Kahn's theory of how political structures will change is that the only way global problems will change is if they are preceded by violence. It is only when something is threatened on the international scale that people are forced to change their systems to something different. A key factor in his argument is that creating a system that is larger than what it needs to operate is in itself essentially defeating. This means that any system, biological or man-made, which becomes large enough to have more resources than it needs to operate will destroy itself. There is an obvious amount of growth and development that occurred to Herman Kahn moving through the 50s and 60s, focusing on military strategy, and then in his later works in the 70s about social community. Kahn had a form of social conservatism about his outlook on the community. At his core, Kahn was an optimist. He saw systems on a grand scale and did not look at the micro-level effects that they might have. Kahn would look at cities as a form of hope, where people run to them for hope of a better future. The slums of a city are where some of the most optimistic and hard-working people live. Kahn was not so much interested in the future based on the inherent interest for himself, but he was interested in the future because how he created government policy. He had to think about the future because it would be shaped by the policy choices that were being made today. So his ideas of the future were more intertwined with the systems and policies that he could imagine. This history and policymaking can be seen in his futurist ideas such as the Erroneous Council, which is where if futurists have a solution to a world problem, then they should try and let the government leaders figure it out for themselves. The solution itself is not the key to solving the problem, but working through the policy issue can have more insight than the solution. Kahn looked for the larger successes that possible negative events might have. This can be seen in his strategies for nuclear toleration, where he states that after a nuclear war, the human race will be able to rebuild a civilization. Given his positive outlook that he had of the future in the long term, his thinking was usually clouded by current problems in the short term. Kahn created the term called broad studies, meaning a systematic mixture of conceptual and analytical approaches based on a diverse technical expertise dealing with intricate and multifaceted issues from a large scale and future-oriented perspectives. A simpler way of saying this would be for experts to predict the future outcomes and to change them if they are bad or undesired. In conclusion, it is clear to see that Herman Kahn was clearly a futurist. From his first policy-making work at the Rand Corporation to his last writings about the future, Kahn had to think many years into the future based on his job necessity and not just because of his own interest. His ability to produce scenarios to develop ideas of the future became an excellent tool to use for other futurists to develop their own ideas of the future. His broader ideas of the future based on systems allowed Kahn to make predictions not just 10 years into the future, but close to 30 or 40 years into the future. Kahn was a great thinker and one of the most influential military strategists living through the Cold War era.